Hello everyone and welcome back to Navis Nobilite tutorial videos. And today we're going to be going over the monster that is the boarding action. Now, boarding action, like the gunnery table, is one of the more daunting elements of the game because you have to think about a lot of math and you have to do comparisons and you have to look for blast markers and you have to read special rules. And I'm going to try to demystify it as best I can. So, first things first, how do you do a boarding action? Okay. All you have to do to initiate a boarding action is have a ship land touching or on top of another ship, and then you make the declaration immediately in the moving action that you are going to board. Now, there are some ships in the game that cannot do boarding actions. Bear that in mind. There are some ships that have benefits and defenses in boarding actions that are innate to the ship. There are special rules that make certain people better or worse at boarding actions as well. Now, an important thing to note. Remember, you move in the movement phase and you declare a boarding action. Then you may not shoot anything. You may not launch anything. That ship is effectively in stasis. It cannot do anything but the boarding action. Okay? Then it ultimately boils down to a roll of a d6 with some pretty hefty modifiers. Now, before I go into the details of this modifier table, I want to go and talk to you about boarding value. This is what you compare between the two ships to see who has the advantage in the boarding action. Now, what you do to determine your boarding value is add up all of the remaining hit points of the ship. Okay, so if I have an Explorer class ship it would be 12 hits. If I had an Emperor, it would also be 12 hits. If I had a Gothic cruiser, it would be 8 hits. So assuming that I have not taken any damage prior. Any damage is taken off of your boarding value, okay? Your remaining hits, not your starting hits, your remaining hits. Then you apply modifiers that apply to your ship or race, such as the Mark of Corn, which doubles its boarding value. Also, Tyranids double their boarding value. Or, like the Tau Corvatra, which cut your boarding value in half. And only then, if you are the defender, you add your remaining turrets, which means if you are an Explorer class starship and you have 12 hits, you halve that to 6, and only then, if you're the defender, add 5 for your turrets. That's just one example of the situation. Then you compare the two boarding values and determine the benefit of the modifier. Now, what are these modifiers? It's listed here. If your boarding value is higher than the enemy's, +1 modifier. If you are double the enemy's, it's +2. If it's triple the enemy, it's +3, and it's 4 times or more, it's +4. Now, you only apply these once. You don't get to stack them on top of one another. Okay? So if I have boarding value of 10 and my enemy has a boarding value of 9, then I get +1. If I have 10 and they have 5, I get +2. If I have 10 and they have 2, then I'm going to be getting +4. As you can see, effectively, it's all a matter of you get these benefits are only applied once. Okay? And it's always the highest one that you can achieve. Now, boarding action results. Okay? Remember, you roll that dice. All right? And you determine who has ultimately the higher value. You roll your dice and you add your modifier, or you subtract your modifier. Okay? The total score is not limited to 6. It can potentially result in a roll of up to 12 or more. There's also a chance of each ship suffering a critical hit during the fighting. Now, the difference between the two rolls is the amount of damage the loser takes. So if I roll a 6 and somebody else rolls a 1, they take 5 points of damage that cannot be saved with Brace for Impact. Okay? Now, the difference in the damage, okay, the difference in the dice rolls, the amount of damage that is taken by the enemy can also determine whether or not critical hits happen. All right? And it's on both sides because both sides are sending people over. You can have a bunch of Khorne berserkers storming an Imperial vessel. The Imperial vessel is still going to be sending in stormtroopers with demo charges to the enemy's engine room to throw in and blow things up. So the difference in the score results in this table. If the difference in score is 1, the boarding result is considered a stalemate. So one person takes 1 point of damage. Both sides roll a d6, and on a 5 up, the opponent takes a critical hit. If the difference is 2 with heavy fighting, the winner rolls of that boarding action rolls on a 4 up, they cause a crit to their opponent, and the loser rolls a 5 up to cause a crit. Now, on a 3, which is driven back, the winner rolls for a 3 up, and the loser rolls for a 6 up on the crit. On a 4, you are stormed. The winner rolls a 2 or better to cause a critical hit, and the loser rolls a 6 up. On a 5 or better, okay, that's overwhelming damage. The winner automatically critically hits their opponent, and the opponent does not have a chance to crit at all. Okay? Now, here's the funny part. If both players have the same score after modifiers, the combat is a draw. In this case, the ships grapple together and continue fighting in each subsequent end phase. Neither ship may move, shoot, or launch ordnance until the boarding action results in one of the ships being destroyed. The victorious ship can then move off and continue fighting. What this means, if you draw, these ships are locked together for the rest of the game until one of them dies. It just keeps on going. Even if later somebody wins, like does 1 point of damage, doesn't matter. They're still fighting, and they're still going. And nothing is going to stop until one of them is dead. Now, multi-ship boarding actions. When several ships attempt to board on an enemy vessel, the attacking player may elect to let them board together or separately. If they board together, add the boarding values together and a single dice roll is made to work out the boarding results. Very frequently, this will happen with escorts. Race and other modifiers only counted once. So if both a Chaos Murder cruiser with a normal Chaos crew and a Devastation cruiser with a Chaos Space Marine crew board an Imperial cruiser together, they would get a +2 race modifier, the +1 for being Chaos, being suspended by the +2 for having a ship with Chaos, supersede, by the +2 for having a ship with Chaos Space Marine crew. This is in addition to the +1 for the ships having a higher boarding value than the ship being boarded. It is not twice the boarding value because the ship being boarded gets to count its turret value, for a total of +3 to the Chaos player. This is also not taking into account whether or not any of the ships have any other modifiers that must be added or subtracted. So if a ship is braced or on special orders or crippled, they still apply, both coming and going. Any damage points inflicted are distributed amongst the attacking ships by the attacker himself, but the chance of critical damage being caused applies to each and every ship attempting to board. So even if you have 2 ships that have boarded one ship, both of your ships are at risk of being critted. That means they are both rolled for. Okay? In the case of separate boarding, roll for each ship or capital ship or escort squadron separately. In the case of the defending ship, must roll separately against each attacker, and the damage it takes is cumulative, but each attacking ship and escort squadron must modify its boarding roll based only upon its own value, not the values of the other ships. Now, escort ships boarding. Escort ships can attempt to board other ships using the rules above. They can even attempt to board capital ships if they wish, although escorts will only stand a chance against a badly damaged vessel. Remember that when escorts are boarding or being boarded, a successful critical hit will destroy them. So it is quite possible for an escort to win a boarding action but be destroyed in the process. Now, this boarding table. These are the important things that you have to consider. If your enemy ship has blast markers in direct base contact, they get a +1. That means you or them. So if you both have blast markers on your bases at the moment of boarding in direct base contact, this is completely a wash. They get +1, you get +1. It's a wash. The enemy ship is crippled, +2 to your benefit. Again, if you are also crippled, it's a wash. The enemy ship is on special orders. Again, a +1. In the end, it becomes a wash if you are both on special orders. If you are orcs or chaos, you get a +1. If you have Space Marines, it's +2. If you are Chaos Space Marines, you only apply the Space Marine benefit. You do not add up the 1 + 2 for a total of 3. I know this is kind of lame, but it is what it is. And then we have the boarding value or higher. Now, what does this mean ultimately in the game as such? Boarding actions can cause an incredible amount of damage. I have taken on much larger ships with much smaller ships and dealt a huge amount of damage, not necessarily because I rolled well, but because I had enough modifiers to even the playing field. So if I am a cruiser and I decide to attack a battleship, they're going to have a higher boarding value than me. They may even have +2. But if the enemy ship is on special orders and you have a blast marker on top of them, then that +2 goes away. Suddenly the boarding value is just straight up a roll, and if they roll a 1 and I roll a 6, that's 5 damage to an enemy battleship that they have no way of stopping. Also, Necron ships, which are notoriously difficult to kill, especially the Tomb ship, have no major benefits to boarding, which means if I am playing another race and I want to end the threat of a Necron ship without them having to roll their 2-up saves everywhere, I'm going to board them because they can't defend themselves against this damage. Necrons, while they are the most powerful fleet in the game, have this one giant weakness. And Tau, the exploration fleet, are very weak against this, especially if you are a race that are particularly good at getting into boarding actions like Space Marines. So it is critically important that you read this section in detail, and generally speaking, memorize this chart. It's actually really, really simple when you actually get a little practice in. But boarding actions are incredibly nuanced, even if it ultimately does boil down to a D6. You will have the heroic moment of the Tau ship that repels the Space Marines, just so you know. And you know what? That's intrinsic to the entire 40K universe, where the underdog somehow pulls out. And there will, of course, be moments where you simply flatten the enemy and move on to the next ship to flatten. Another important thing, if you go all ahead full and you land on another ship at the end of that movement, you can both ram and board. But remember, you must make that declaration immediately. You can ram and then board, just so you know. Okay, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all again in the next video.